I want to talk to you about freight factoring, and the question is, what should you really retain? What should you really remember about freight factoring this year? What is it, and how does it work? So here are the facts I want you to really pay attention to. So running a trucking company, or a cargo van company, or a sprinter van company, let's just say a delivery company in general, is actually a hard work. Okay, it's not just about managing your vehicle and schedule. You also have to handle the back office tasks of things. You have to really think about managing things like HR, marketing, and accounting all on your own. Think about it. And Freight Factory does a great job because it helps with the accounting part by making it easier to manage your cash flow. So if you are wondering how freight factoring actually works and whether or not it's right for your delivery business, in today's conversation, I want to clarify everything for you. Let me first go granular here. So what is freight factoring for real? So the freight business tactics are pretty simple. You pick up goods at one location, deliver them to the next, and issue an invoice to the shipper or broker who actually pays you for your service. Right? Pretty straightforward, pretty direct. Now you profit actually from the transaction between how much they paid you versus how much you spend on the on hauling the load. So, but usually you don't get paid right away. That's really the kicker. The industry average is 40 days. That's 40 days. And some companies may take up to 90 days to pay invoices. Think about that, 90 days. How are you going to eat in those 40 days, in those 90 days? That's a long time to wait, and it can really disrupt your cash flow. So freight factoring provides quick cash for your invoices by outsourcing the collections process to a third-party factoring company. Okay, they purchase your invoice at a slightly reduced rate, eliminating the need for you to chase payments actually or use your savings while waiting for payments. So that's really good. So how does freight factoring really work? Let's really go a little more granular here, a little more detailed. Freight factoring does one simple thing. It pays you faster for work you have already done. So you haul a load from one place to another. You submit your paperwork to the factoring company instead of to the broker. You get paid right within 24 hours of the load being verified, and your broker pays the factoring company in 30 to 45 days. Okay. So when you compare and contrast the freight factoring and quick pay, some brokers offer quick pay, an option that expedites payments in exchange for a fee. Typically, carriers can expect payments in 2 to 5 days if they choose a quick pay option. A freight factoring company usually pays carriers within 24 hours of receiving an invoice and verifying the load. And so, what does freight factoring what does a freight factoring company really do? Well, a freight factoring company takes on some of your business's accounts receivable functions. They often invoice brokers for you, and the broker pays them, not you. They charge modest factoring fees for this service, and freight factoring companies will also perform broker credit checks for you. Because they collect from the brokers or companies on your behalf, freight factoring companies free you up to handle other aspects of running your business. Let me talk to you now about the benefits. So when you think about the freight factoring, what are the pros here? Well, you have a lot. You get paid within 24 hours. Think about it. 24 hours, not 90 days. 24 hours. You have the ability to reduce the accounting burden, right? You can qualify brokers, and you can improve forecasting. By forecasting, I'm speaking here about cash inflows versus cash outflows. Let me break it down a little further for you. When I speak about getting paid within 24 hours, once your invoice is approved, you will receive a faster payment, sometimes via ACH or wire transfers. So fast payments improve cash flow and operating capital for small delivery companies and large carriers. Okay, and so you also have the ability to reduce the accounting burden. What do I mean by that? Basically, you effectively outsource your your accounts receivable department to another company for a minimal fee. It can be a 5%, it can be a maximum 10%. So this takes a large part of the accounting burden off your plate so you can focus on other tasks. You won't have to spend valuable time making collection calls or even chasing down invoices. That's a lot of time freed up, okay? You also have the ability to qualify brokers. So another benefit is that a factoring company will often qualify brokers for you, performing credit checks to ensure their reliability. I released not long ago an entire video on how to check the credit score of a credit score for a freight broker. So if you need more information, go and watch that video. So the thing is, if you don't have the resources or time to do this, freight factoring can help can help by being an additional layer of vetting, and that's really fantastic. And you also have the ability to improve forecasting. So freight invoice factoring guarantees that you'll be paid on time, which makes forecasting much easier. I'm speaking here about cash inflows versus cash outflows. And this service helps you create a business plan you can stick to, especially if your business is just getting off the ground, right? You need cash. You need cash to run business, and you need cash real fast. You can't just afford to wait 45 days or 90 days to get the cash before you can run your business. You need cash right away to pay for gas, to pay drivers, to do a couple of things, and to pay salaries, to pay your own salary too. Let me talk to you about risk mitigation. So how does a factoring company assess risk? Because when you think about freight factoring, you have an element of risk management, risk mitigation, risk monitoring. Okay. Now, factoring companies actually bear the risk of unpaid invoices and deal with the challenge of collecting from trucking companies if customers fails to pay. And in the industry, you are looking at 15 to 20% of customers that fail to pay. Now, when I say fail to pay, it's either fail to pay outright, like they never pay, or they pay after 1 year or after 6 months, after a slightly longer period. So let me give you a few things a factoring company looks at before partnering with you, because they got to mitigate their risks too. They have to make sure that to stay in business, they have to really monitor the risk. So first of all, they will look at your credit history. This is not as large an issue as some others, but it does play a role in a factoring company's willingness to partner with you. Are your customers creditworthy? More important than your personal credit score is the stability of the customers you bill. Will they pay their invoices on time? A freight factoring company often requires that brokers or customers be approved before they will factor your invoices. Are the invoices valid? Especially with fraud plaguing the market, freight factoring companies want to verify that each invoice they process is actually genuine. Okay, they want to make sure this is for real. Okay, and they're not really processing something really, let's say, out of thin air. You also have, do you have a diverse customer base? That's another important element. In other words, are you putting all your eggs in the same basket, or have you diversified? Do you have a diverse customer base? That's really critical from a freight broker's point of view. Working with several brokers as opposed to just a few lowers the risk of non-payment. Is the lack of cash flow making it challenging to operate your business day to day? It's one of those things where the freight broker wants to really understand how the deficit of cash is actually impacting your business. Do you have slow paying customers affecting your ability to pay bills on time? In other words, how is your own cash situation affecting your cash outflow? Have you done credit checks to make sure a broker will pay before you took the load, right? Because the whole thing is you do not want to take any load that comes your way. And also, are you wasting valuable time on collections calls that you could spend on other things, like for instance, actually chasing better paying loads on load boards, for instance? So let me give you a few extras here. So when you think about freight factoring, what's the difference between recourse and non-recourse freight factoring? You probably hear this a lot in the industry. Some people talk about recourse freight factoring, and also some other people talk about non-recourse freight factoring. So recourse is actually a clause in a freight factoring contract that allows freight factoring companies to collect from you if your customer does not pay promptly, or worse, and this happens, unfortunately, doesn't pay at all. Like, that's what I said a little earlier. If your customer doesn't pay at all, that's really big. So that's what recourse is, okay? What about non-recourse? Non-recourse means that if your customer declares bankruptcy or goes out of business between the time you submit your invoice and when they are supposed to pay the factoring company will not try to collect from you. And if a customer fails to pay, however, a non-recourse agreement won't prevent a factoring company from pursuing payment from you. So that's the important element, okay? So when you actually go to a freight factoring company, see what kind of non-recourse factoring they offer, okay? Especially if they tell you, we have an all-in-one an all-in-one non-recourse factoring arrangement with some additional benefits like they charge flat rate fees, so there are no surprises. You have the ability to cancel your freight factoring service anytime you want. There are no minimum volume requirements. That's big because usually freight factoring company like to have minimum volume requirements to sort of solidify their revenue base, and this could be actually detrimental to you, the customer. So you want to make sure you don't have no minimum volume requirements, and you can submit and track your freight factoring invoice from nearly any device connected to the internet. So that's really good, okay? And other terms come into play besides non-recourse and recourse agreements. So you want to be familiar with as many terms as possible. Okay, it's all about educating yourself and knowing exactly what you actually are getting yourself into. That's going to help solidify your business down the road. So in talking about freight factoring, everything you need to know, I want to talk to you quickly about freight factoring terms, rates, and qualifications. This will be very important for you in the long run. Okay. So first of all, before signing an agreement with a factoring company, make sure you understand the fine print and what freight factoring will cost you. So let's talk about the rates. So freight factoring rates may vary based on your business value, but also the geography. Okay, a factoring fee can range from 2.5% to 5% per invoice, and sometimes can go all the way to 10%. Some companies charge an initial setup fee for your first invoice. So the most important thing to remember about fees, even flat fees, is to subtract them when figuring out your profit and loss on each load. What about the terms here? Basically, you might see the term spot factoring, which means you can pick and choose which invoices you want a factoring company to manage. Many providers, including Truck Stop or even DAT, offer spot factoring options. So spot factoring is usually better for smaller delivery companies, smaller trucking companies. Larger freight companies often use contract factoring to negotiate their rates, but they must factor all of their invoices. So what are the qualifications here? When you think about freight factoring, what kind of qualifications should you be thinking about? One thing for sure, not everyone qualifies for a freight invoice factoring, and that makes sense because, hey, listen, this industry is actually laden with risk, okay? So you got to really cover your butt. You will have to meet some requirements before being approved. You will need to meet a minimum credit score determined by the factoring company. It will take some time to get approved for your first factor. You need to have been in business for at least 90 days, and newer trucking companies usually need to provide a minimum annual income or projected yearly income. So that's really important. From a scalability point of view, you want to cover all the bases, all the necessary bases, especially if you know that you are going to be with a factor company for a long time, if you are going to be with a freight factor for a very long time. I want to talk to you now about the taxes here. How do you choose the right factoring company for your specific business? See, the thing is that when you actually go for a factoring company, you want to pay attention to the application process, to the speed of payment, to the stability of the company itself, to the borrowing capacity, and also the program types that they have, okay? So let me break it down for you. When you think about the application process, you will need to provide some basic info like your tax ID, that is your EIN, your employer identification number. You might need to have your MC authority number and direct deposit details if you want to have direct deposit, because that's how they're going to send you the ACH transfers. So you might need all this thing, some basic info to apply for a factoring. Gather all essential information in advance so you can expedite your application. Now think about speed of payment. So how fast will you get paid and under what circumstances? This is an important question to ask if you want to improve your cash flow management this year. Also, stability. Look for a factoring company that is well established with a reputation for good customer service, right? Because that's what you want too. You want to really make sure that as you're trying to solidify your cash inflows, you also want to solidify your reputation in the industry. Also, think about borrowing capacity. There will be a maximum credit line or factoring facility that caps how much money you can quote unquote borrow against your outsourcing invoices at any one time. So the higher the better. The higher the borrowing capacity, the better. Also think about program types. So do they offer recourse, non-recourse, or a mix of the two? Because this is how you're going to really position yourself and also position your ability to solidify your cash inflows and cash outflows down the line. Let me talk to you about another criterion to pay attention to: advancement percentages. You want to think about fee transparency, contract termination, and also additional fees, because those additional fees will eat into your revenue. So be very careful there. So when I speak about advancement percentages, so depending on the agreement, you might get the entire payout amount or a portion, while the factoring company holds some in reserve, right? So now, what are the advancement percentages? Well, the average in the industry depends on the niche you're in. If you're doing hazmat, if you're doing a reefer, if you're doing if you're doing flatbed trucking, it really depends on what kind of load you are hauling. But it usually hovers around 50 to 75%. That's the average in the country. Okay. Now, what about fee transparency? So in addition to a flat factoring fee per invoice, some companies may charge fees for ACH transfers or add a surcharge if you don't meet a certain threshold of invoices. Make sure that you ask about all fees and what each fee covers, because you want to have a clear idea about how you position yourself, okay? What about contract termination? So the factoring company will have a detailed contract for your review. To actually end the deal, you will have to give notice before the end date, and that notification window may vary based on the factoring company. You also want to make sure that you understand what happens if you terminate an agreement when the factoring company still has invoices that your customers haven't paid, because there is actually a limbo situation there, and you have to know how to actually position responsibilities, how to adapt responsibilities. Who is responsible for the unpaid invoices, the open invoices? You or the freight factor? Finally, I want you to pay attention to additional fees. So a factoring company might charge additional fees, such as per transaction costs, administrative setup fees, or extra fees for faster pay. There may also be penalties for early termination. So you have to really see how you position yourself, especially in the long run, if you want to really come out of the whole process profitable. So in conclusion to this conversation, I spoke to you about freight factoring. I spoke to you about everything you need to know, and I give you the facts, the benefits, the risk mitigation, the extras, the tactics, and the conclusion. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.